are following Jainism from generations. And Professor Eric Larson is here.
All right,
So
good morning, everyone. All right, we're starting the next session. Thank you for the discussion. So we're starting the next discussion now. The panel is entitled The Biological and Spiritual Evolution of Consciousness, and we'll begin with Professor Eric Larson, who will be the chair of it. Rigo, I don't know if you can make Professor Larson the main. Yeah. Hold on 1 minute. I'll just spotlight you quickly.
So I welcome Professor Larson.
All right.
It is all about your own effort. This conference is going on.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sincere thanks to you on behalf of JERF.
Yes.
Thank you. It's my great privilege to host this session this morning. We are the second panel of the second day of the conference, and it has been a wonderful conference so far. I want to congratulate the organizers, the hosts, and the sponsors of this wonderful event. And I want to welcome each and every one of you. I see there are so many participants from every part of the world, and it's our great pleasure to have you with us this morning. So our session now is the biological and spiritual evolution of consciousness. We will have 3 papers, as you can see on the screen, and each speaker will go in turn. And then afterwards, we'll have some time for a question and answer. So with that, let me introduce our first speaker. And we're very happy to welcome Dr. Narayan Kachara. He is Professor Emeritus of Jain Vishva Bharati Institute in Lucknow, India. He was formerly Principal Motilal Nehru Regional Engineering College, now the National Institute of Technology, Allahabad. He has authored or edited a dozen books and has published more than 40 articles on Jainism in scientific context. And he will speak to us now on consciousness and the doctrine of Dr. Kachara.
Share the screen. Okay.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, okay. I am going to talk to you on consciousness and doctrine of karma. And we have heard many speakers yesterday and today about Jain concept of consciousness. Consciousness and karma are 2 main or great principles of Jainism. I shall be talking or making only a passing reference to consciousness because it has been discussed in detail, and then I will step on to doctrine of karma, which is very important. I start with the concept of consciousness in Western philosophy because we already know what is the concept in Jain philosophy. Consciousness in Western philosophy comprises qualities of subjectivity, self-awareness, sentience, sapience, and ability to perceive relationships with the environment. This is fine, but the question is, who possesses these qualities? Some Western traditions accept existence of soul, but do not connect it with consciousness. This is so the problem still remains to define consciousness. René Descartes put up the theory of mind and matter dualism, but this is not accepted by science because science is not able to accept a non-physical existence. Science regards consciousness as an emergent property, epiphenomenon. So it thinks that the consciousness emerges out of some material process, particularly the brain processes. Next, please. Next slide. Jain philosophy rejects this kind of hypothesis, and it's very emphatic about this assertion that the matter cannot give rise to consciousness, and therefore the body processes will not be able to generate consciousness. Consciousness is property of soul in all Indian traditions. Coming to Jain philosophy, consciousness in Jain philosophy is the identifying property of soul, as we have heard other speakers. Soul is one of the 6 substances. This is important. Soul is a substance. Consciousness is power as well as function of soul. It manifests in two main ways. Next slide. Gyan and darshan. Next, please. So it manifests as Gyan, what we call as intelligence or ability to know. Now, the back slide. Please go to back slide. Yes. Gyan is intelligence or ability to know self or the non-self. And then there is a darshan. Please go to the last slide. Then there is a darshan, which is perception of the self and perception of the non-self. Then there is a sukh, ability to experience bliss. These are the main characteristics of soul. And life and consciousness are coextensive. Wherever there is life, there is consciousness, and vice versa. Embodied soul exhibits other qualities like desires, instincts, activities of body, mind, and speech, attachment and aversion, beliefs, experiencing pleasure and pain, social and environmental interaction, etc. These are all qualities associated with embodied or what we call as impure soul. Next, please. Next slide. So much about consciousness because my time is limited. So I like to devote more time on doctrine of karma. All philosophies believing in karma also believe in rebirth. That's an important point. The doctrine of karma is a central theme of Jain philosophy. It requires a dominant position in Jain philosophy. This is the law of causality of the soul. And the main premises of this law are, number one, there are consequences to each action of soul. And number two, the consequences are experienced by the soul performing actions and nobody else. And number three, this tradition of cause and effect is beginningless. As the soul is beginningless, the tradition is also beginningless. Next slide. Next slide. Soul binds karma for activities performed. This is important. We perform activities by our body, mind, and speech. And all such activities bind karma. And these karmas are in fact information records. So they keep information of the activities we perform. There are two types of karma, bhav karma and dravya karma. Bhav karmas are impressions of actions in the soul. And these impressions defile the soul nature. And the future actions of the soul are guided by these impressions. This is very important. So what we do today, will have bearing on what we do tomorrow. Dravya karma is physical records of the actions on subtle matter that comprise karma body or karman body. This is a unique concept in Jainism, that how the records are kept physical. There are two types of karma, bhav karma and dravya karma. They maintain dynamic equilibrium, satisfying the principle of parallelism, meaning thereby that if there is a change in bhav karma, there will be corresponding equal change in dravya karma and vice versa. Next slide. These karmas hinder manifestation of natural powers of the soul. The natural powers of the soul is Gyan, Darshan, which are infinite. The soul is in a state of illusion due to karma. It does not act according to its natural powers. There is another subtle body, which we call as a Tejas body, can be called as a bioenergy body that vitalizes the gross body which you see. So karma body and energy body, these two bodies accompany the soul migrating from one body to another on rebirth. So when we take birth in another form, these two bodies will be going along with the soul. Soul, karma body, and bioenergy body extend the space of the gross material body. So if somebody asks a Christian, where is the soul or where is the karma body, then you say it is they occupy or extend the same space as the gross material. Next. Our existence now has three tiers. So we have a soul, we have a subtle body comprising carbon body and energy body, and a third gross material body, which you see. And all these three units together determine our performance. You see the figure here. On the left-hand side, you will find soul and bhava karma. And in the middle, you find dravya karma and tejas body. And on the right, you will find gross body. So these three different units, they always interact and they are interconnected. They form a system. So our performance is based on all these three. Next slide. We now discuss about what are the effects of karma, what these karmas do to us. So to understand that, we must know about what is the influx of karma, which is technically known as the ashram. And this is caused by the activities of the soul. The 5 types of influx means there are 5 ways the karmas affect our soul. This is the best way to understand how the karmas behave. Number 1, perversity. Mistaken belief that considers non-truth as truth, such as I am body. There are many people who think that I am body and they are not aware or conscious of soul. And non-abstinence, engaging in violent activities and activities for body comforts and enjoyment, well-being of soul is overlooked. So we normally, most of the people are engaged or they are more careful about their body comforts and enjoyment rather than the soul. Next, please. Next. Deviousness, lack of spirituality. This is a common problem, that we overlook the benefits of the soul. Patience, this is a very important concept in Jainism. There are passions which is in the form of anger, ego, deceit, and greed. These are the 4 main passions. There are also quasi-passions like dislike, sorrow, disgust, and so on. There are 7 of them. And these passions are the main problem as far as our life is concerned. Then the 5th one is the activities of body, mind, and speech. This is also because of karma. All these features which I talked of, they are absent in a pure soul, free of karma. So a liberated soul will not have any of these 5. How the karmas are born? This is an important question. So the activities we perform, they cause vibrations in soul and also in the karma body. And this vibrating karma body attracts subtle karma matter from cosmos, and that binds with the existing karma due to patience. The patience is a very important factor in our life. It acts as a glue. So the coming subtle karma matter will bind with the existing karma because of patience. Next, please. The bonding karma has 4 defining features. Number 1, numerical strength, meaning what amount of subtle matter is binding or bonding at any particular time or for any particular activity. Nature of karma, there are 8 types. So these 8 types of karma are defined with respect to 8 different properties of the soul. I can't go in detail. I'll just go through the list. Intelligence obscuring karma. This obscures manifestation of intelligence of the soul. Awareness or perception obscuring karma. Deluding karma, this is of 2 kinds, perception deluding and conduct deluding. Vitality obstructing karma, that obstructs the good activities. Feeling producing karma, pleasure and pain. Age determining karma, form producing karma, and status determining karma. Next, please. The first 4 of these karmas are psychical karma, and these karmas determine our psychical performance. They inhibit the full manifestation of soul powers. So we don't experience or express infinite intelligence or infinite perception, although soul has intrinsically those kinds of abilities. And the biological karma is the last four karmas. And these karmas determine biological features of the body, but do not interfere with the psychical performance. They just keep the soul embodied. The next is the duration of bond, the time left before the karma becomes active. The karma does not become active immediately after bonding. There is some time left. Intensity of bond, which is the intensity of experience when karma becomes active. Next, please. Next. There are two important principles again. We had talked of karma bonding and what does the karma do to us. The karma keeps us embodied, and they will keep you in a worldly cycle of birth and death. How to get rid of this cycle? This is the important question. It's dealt mainly in or very prominently in Jain philosophy. The first thing to do is inhibition of karma. Stop influx of karma. This is possible. This can be done. When the soul realizes its true nature, it also realizes the adverse effects of karma. And therefore, it now takes steps to stop influx of karma. Now, how to do it? This is done by checking the causes responsible for influx. So we discussed about 5 causes. I can't go in details, but the concept is that you check on those kinds of activities. And if you do that, the life becomes happy. Then another concept of nirjana, shedding of karma. Even if you stop influx of karma, you have to shed off the existing karma in order that you get liberated. So nirjana is a very important concept. And this is required for spiritual progress and it's essential for liberation. Without that, you can't get liberated. So this is done by spiritual practices like penance, contemplation, meditation, etc. Next, please. Next. And if you eliminate or shed off all the psychical karma, the first 4 ones, then the soul becomes omniscient, what we call as Arihant. And then in that state, the natural powers of the soul are manifested in full measure, so that the soul experiences infinite intelligence, infinite perception, and so on. Although he is not able to express it. What can be expressed is only finite, but the infinite can only be experienced. So the omniscient experiences complete truth. He has perfect knowledge, and there is no subjectivity. His entire speech, whatever speech, is objective. Omniscient enjoys perfect bliss. He knows past, present, and future. He is aware of all that exists in this universe. Nothing is unknown to him by first-person experience. Thank you. Next, please. Next slide. We talked about karma so far, but the fact is that the karma is not the only factor which decides our destiny. Our destiny is determined by other factors too. The number 1 is free will, which is a very important concept. Soul has free will. Soul is free to act. No, it's not bound entirely by karma. It can overlook or override the effects of karma and act. So it has a free will. And there is no other commander or controlling power. Jainism does not believe in that controlling God. So the soul is the sole power that controls our activity, and the soul has free will to act. And there is no conflict between the doctrine of karma and free will. The soul is free to act, but when the actions will bond karma. So these are the cause and effect kind of relationship. So both free will and karma have roles in our life, and both have limits. In fact, there are 5 operators which determine our destiny. Number 1 is the nature of the soul. Soul wants peace and happiness. This is everybody's experience, and nobody can deny this fact that he wants peace and happiness. and one strives for it.
We have about 1 or 2 minutes left.
Okay, okay.
Thank you, sir.
Next slide. I finished the last, next one. Next slide, please. Circumstances. So the external environment, we have no control on them. Examples are meeting and departing the beloved ones, loss and profit, social norms, natural calamities, government rules and policies, etc. We have no control. These are also big factors in our destiny. Time, many events are time dependent. We grow with time. Every living being grows with time. Karma, we have already discussed about. This forms our internal environment. And this determines our desires, thoughts, beliefs, ego, instincts, urges, drives, moods, emotions, feelings, etc. Soul has to face the consequences of his actions. And the last one is the free will or the soul initiative. We make choices and we are free to make choices. But the only thing is that if it is a bad choice, you burn a lot of karma. So what is the wisdom comes here, that you should make good choices in your life, and that way you can shape your future. Last slide, please. Next one. And next one. The last comment I would like to make is that you can become omniscient. Everybody has the capacity to become omniscient. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kachara, for that wonderful exposition of the interface between consciousness, soul, and the body. And this leads us very well into the next presentation, which is by Professor Ashok Jain, who is retired professor of botany and honorary director of the Institute of Ethnobiology in Jivaji University, Gwalior, India. His fields of research include conservation, ethnobotany, taxonomy, and Jainism in science. He has a special interest in biological science and its relationship with Jainism. He has published over 120 papers in national and international journals and 20 articles in various Jain journals, books, and proceedings of Jain seminars. In addition, he has authored or edited 7 books. He is the recipient of various prestigious awards and honors. In fact, a new plant, a geranium, Jainli, was found in the Indian state of Himachal Pradesh, has been named after him. And it's our privilege to welcome him to speak today on consciousness in Ekandriya Jivas, or one-sensed organisms, with special reference to microorganisms. And Professor Jain, welcome.
Jai Janendra, patron of the organizing committee, Dr. Mark, chairpersons, Director General Shamni, Dr. Chaitanya Pragyaji, executive directors, managing directors, members of academic committees, all resource persons, all learned speakers, and participants. I am going to speak on the topic consciousness in Ekandriya Jivas with a special reference to microorganisms. We know that Jain philosophy advocates that one sense living beings or Ekandriya Jiva, they are very, very conscious. And they have been classified into 5 following types: earth-bodied or Prithvikayak, water-bodied or Jalkayak, fire-bodied or Agnikayak, air-bodied or Vayukayak, and subtle plant-bodied or Vanaspatikayak. Then several Jain scriptures and Jain canons, they prove the life in these Ekandriya Jiva, and all the 5-bodied Ekandriya Jiva, they possess systematic features of taxonomy, morphology, anatomy, physiology, and cognitive and emotive functions. I would start with the first living being, Ekandriya Jiva, that is earth-bodied. We know that these earth-bodied components, they are found in different types like sand, stones, orpiment, rocks, salts, iron, vermilion, red, chalk, copper, tin, lead, and several other metals. And according to Jain philosophy, there are numerous independent souls in a lump of soil. They are subtle and superfine. Then they have food appetite also. They hanker after food every moment without break and ingest food of infinite particles. They appropriate materials having different colors, taste, smell, and touch. They respire also. They can inhale and they exhale also from all 6 directions. If some obstruction is there, then they inhale from 3, 4, or 5 directions. Then when consciousness is there, then certainly they have senses. And there are 2 means of action: corporeal, that is bodily means of action, and karmic means of action. They have knowledge also, and they possess the power of grasping the vibrations by the speech and mind of the human beings. Although it is not possible for them to listen, even they have a kind of tacitic linguistic potential on account of a peculiar type of elimination come subsidence of relevant karma. And due to that karma that articulates knowledge associated with linguistic symbol arises. Although they have no sexual desire, but they enjoy that by tactile enjoyment. Tactile movement is there. So they have tactile enjoyment of sex. Then excitement is also there in these living beings, earth-bodied. They possess 2 kinds of frenzy. Number 1, due to being possessed by an imp, and number 2, due to the rise of deluding. Then they have internal desire also. All 10 instincts, that is food, fear, sex, possession, anger, pride, deceit, greed, inherence, and collective are found in such type of body. They have passion also. There happens to be strong feeling of love, hatred, or anger, because they are too subtle, therefore are not capable of exhibiting such signs when they are angry. Then the lasias or cyclic coloring has been given an importance in Jain philosophy, and these earth-bodied living beings, they also possess these lasias or psychic coloring. And there are 4 psychic colorings in earth-bodied, like Krishna, that is black, Neel, that is blue, Kapod, that is gray, and Tejo, that is fiery. And the lifespan is minimum infra-hour and maximum 20,000 years. Then, what modern science says about these earth-bodied beings? Many scientists and especially geologists, they have tried to prove that these earth-bodied beings, they are also living. And the modern geologists, they are of the view that earth, mountains, etc., they undergo growth and decay. The earth suffers from fatigue, metabolism, and death. The great scientist Newton compared the earth to an animal or a herb. Hutton, Huxley, and Bernardsky also expressed same opinion. Hutton, a famous ecologist, he gave an analogy between circulation of blood and circulation of nutrients in the earth. Here, in this figure, you can see the circulation of nutrients in the earth, in various components of the earth, from plants or to soil or water, etc., forest, etc., etc. And well-known scientist Dr. Jagdish Chandra Bose, he also stated that some elements and metals also exhibit physiological characteristics. And to his surprise, in his experiments, the curves produced slightly warmed magnetic oxide of iron showed a striking resemblance to those of muscles. It means he compared it with the muscles of human body. It means these earth-bodied entities, they are living beings. A very important hypothesis was given by James Lovelock, and he tried to prove Earth as a living entity. But unfortunately, due to some insufficient scientific evidences, it remained just a hypothesis. But ultimately, he was trying to prove that earth-bodied organisms, living beings, they are living. Now coming over to next, that is water-bodied beings, that is Jalkai. And I am grateful to Shamli Chaitanya Pragya ji that I took this matter from her thesis, and water can be considered as a living entity based on following grounds. She has given very sound grounds to prove it. Number one, if life originated in water, as per modern scientific view, it means it is living. If CHO can be life, HO can also be life. If single cellular beings are living, single molecular beings also can be. And the famous Jaina scripture Gomatsar, it mentions that the shape of the body of water-bodied beings is spherical, which is in accordance with science, as the tendency of dipolar molecules to form a spherical shape is more. And some physiological and psychological changes observed in water also prove that it is a living entity. Now, our own well-known scientist, Dr. Jeev Rajji Jain, he gave a very important view regarding the livingness of water. Dr. Jeev Raj says, when oxygen is dissolved or absorbed in water, what does it do there? It makes the hydrogen bond of water stronger. The beehive structure of nanotube allows the ions to move effortlessly through it. Cell energy keeps the movement of oxygen molecules or radicals in dynamic balance. It is absorbed, that is digested in the tube in its hollow space, in its quantum vacancy to form a zygote, that is yoni, and flow of oxygen ions through water channels or structures generates electrical pulses by its movements. Its potential energy is fixed in the nanotubes. Thus, it acts as transducer. It stores electrical energy and supplies on demand. It exhibits first attributes of a living water cell. So this is a very important concept given by Jeev Rajji. Then coming over to fire-bodied beings. Morphologically, fire life is based on karmic function, as these fire-bodied organisms exhibit more explicitly a special characteristics on Nam Karma. It is due to Nam Karma. And these two types of Nam Karma are there. Number one, Udyot Nam Karma, and number two, Atap Nam Karma. Their body shape is oblong, like bundle of needles, and as sharp as a needle's edge. Then some important features which also indicate that it's a living entity, and these features are that no fire can originate and sustain without oxygen. It means its capacity to grow in presence of food, that is oxygen. In absence of oxygen, it turns to be pale and dead. Its lifespan is as minimum as infra-hour and maximum to 3 days and night. And on the basis of morphology, fire lives are of two kinds, subtle and gross. And then scientific proof. Modern thinkers, they admit that fire cannot kindle without the intake of oxygen. Oxygen is must for their kindling. The fire-bodied beings are entities distinct from other types of sentient beings on account of their specific body determining karma, that is heat producing, and luster producing. It also indicates that fire is a living entity. Then coming over to air-bodied organisms. Wind lives are of 5 kinds based on their movement. Number 1, Utkalika, that is intermittent winds. Mandalika, that is whirlwind. Ghanavayu, thick or dense wind. Gunjavayu, high winds that make sounds. And Shuddhavayu, low winds which lacks the above quality. The air-bodied beings have innumerable independent souls, and they are living until they do not have contact with a weapon and turns to be non-living. So it's a living entity. Acharyas, they have given a very important concept, and that concept was the concept of Nigod. They have described the presence of Nigod in earth, roots, other parts of plants, and almost all over the world. Such Nigodiyas may be compared with bacteria, viruses, virions, and prions of modern science. When microscopes were not there, at that time, the Jainacharya mentioned about these smallest living entities. In Gomatsar Jeev Kand, the Nigodiya Jeev have been mentioned in this sutra, Sadharan Nam Karmodayen Jeev Nigod Sarira Bhavanti. It means, due to Sadharan Nam Karam, Jeev takes birth in Nigod. Nigod is that place which gives space to innumerable jivas. Then plants, they have also been classified on the basis of the Nigodiya Jeev. And these Nigodiyas, they have an intrinsic relationship with Vanaspati. And on that basis, Vanaspatis are of two types, Pratyek Sharir Vanaspati and Sadharan Sharir Vanaspati. In a famous Jain scripture, Shat Khandagam, the Pratyek and Sadharan Vanaspati, they have been described in detail. Pratyek Vanaspati, they are again of two types, Paryaptak and Aparyaptak. Sadharan Sharir are of two types, Badhan and Sukshma. And again, Sukshma Vanaspatis, again of two types, that is Paryaptak and Aparyaptak. Paryaptak means developed and Aparyaptak means undeveloped. Aparyaptaks are born with the support of Paryaptaks. So here you can see, in very, very deep, our Jainacharyas went and they explained about these microorganisms, that is Nigodiyas. Then coming over to the first type, that is Pratyek Sharir Vanaspati. This is the sutra given in Dhavala, and it means each body consists of only one jeev. One body, one soul. Example, mango, cucumber, grass, tendrils, bitter gourd, etc. So the jeev possesses independent body. Khair is also an example of Pratyek Shariri type. Then Sadharan Sharir, in Dhavala, in this sutra, it is mentioned that the karma which is responsible for the birth of innumerous jiva of a like body is called Sadharan Sharir Nam Karma, where in a single body, infinite living beings are present. All kinds of undergrounds like carrot, potato, radish, etc., they come under this category and they take birth, inhale, exhale, and die at the same time. Then types of Nigod. There are two types of Nigod. Nitya Nigod, in Shat Khandagam, this sutra mentions about Nitya Nigod. It means such Nitya Nigodi Jivas, they have not taken birth in any Trasgati, means 2, 3, 4 or 5 Indriya. Since time immemorial, they always live in Nigod only. And the Chaturgati or Anitya Nigod, this is the sutra given in Dhavala. It means the Jivas which after taking birth in Dev, Manushya, Triyansh and Narkis again reach to Nigod are called Anitya or Chaturgati Nigod. Means after taking birth in these Gatis, again they go to Nigod Gati. Now again, the plants have been classified by Jainacharyas into Sapratishthit and Apratishthit types. Sapratishthit type, plants which shelter a large number of Nigodiyas, and Apratishthit type, which do not shelter Nigodiyas. In Gomatsar Jeev Kand, several examples are there. The Trana, Balli, small trees, large trees, undergrounds are the 5 types of Vanaspatis. When all five are inhabited by Negodiyas, they are Sapratishthit. When they are devoid of Negodiyas, then they are Apratishthit. In Gomatsar Jeev Kand, the identification of Sapratishthit and Apratishthit plants has been given. The meaning of this sutra given in Gomatsar Jeev Kand is the plants in which veins are invisible, nodes, joints, etc. are divided into equal parts, shows no fiber connection after splitting, and grow again even after destroying them are called Sapratishthit. A beautiful example has been given that we can identify whether it is Sapratishthit or Apratishthit. Example, potato, ginger, arvi, etc. And according to modern biology also, such plants comprise numerous amount of bacteria. It is proved by modern science that such type of plants, they contain numerous amount of bacteria, while the plants of opposite characters and symptoms are called Apratishthit. Now, coming over to the comparison between Negodia, as mentioned by Janacharyas, and the microorganisms as mentioned by modern microbiology, that is bacteria, virus, virion, and prion, etc. Negodias are distributed all over the world in plants, etc. Modern microorganisms are also distributed in the same manner. Then, like Negodias, bacteria and other microorganisms also perform various activities of living beings. The shape of Negodias, as mentioned in Jaina scriptures by Janacharya, happen to be rectangular, that is Aitakar, spherical, goal, and quadrangular, that is Chatushth. And several bacteria and other microorganisms, they also possess the same type of structure. The difference seems to be there, and this difference seems that, as mentioned in Negodias, bacteria do not take birth, respire, or die at the same time. However, some bacteriophages, that is viruses, they infect the bacteria, enter in body of bacteria, and then multiply at the same time. So this can be an analogy between two Negodias as well as the modern microorganisms. And as I mentioned that these Negodias, they take birth by submutation process. And this process may be compared with the vegetative reproduction of modern science. So in this way, I sum up my lecture. I only want to say that whatever has been told by Janacharyas, whatever has been mentioned in ancient Jain scriptures, now each and everything, each and every concept, hypothesis is proving to be correct. Only thing is that in modern science, we require more and more experiments to prove it. I am grateful to you for listening me patiently. And again, I am grateful to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Again, Jai Jain.
Thank you, Professor Jain, for a wonderful presentation about something that we should all be more interested and concerned about, and knowing more about other souls as well as five-sensed organisms. And now we turn to our next topic, which kind of builds very naturally out of the first one, with Mr. Jaipat Singh Jain, who practices law in New York City. He is a member of the board of directors of New York City Bar Association and of the State Attorney Disciplinary Committee, First Department. He is an honorary trustee of Siddhachalam, New Jersey. He is an appellant before India's Supreme Court against a state high court decision holding Santhara or Salakana, the Jain practice of voluntary death, to be suicide. And we're very happy today to welcome Mr. Jain to speak to us about animal consciousness, Jainism, and science. Mr. Jain.
Good morning and good evening. That was a very illuminating presentation by Dr. Kachhara and Ashok Ji Jain. The last one particularly was uh, mind-blowing. I wish we could hear him further, and I'm sure we'll have occasion to interact with him. I want to also thank the organizers for inviting me. Dr. Srimal was my first point of contact, who I know has been a force from the earliest beginnings of this chair. Dr. Sancheti, I understand he's not well, but I did see his chat this morning and had the occasion to exchange a note. So glad he's back. Dr. Iqbal Akhtar has been doing a wonderful job. Dr. Larson, and also by paying my respects to the Maharaj Saabs and Samniji here. My topic, like you said, Eric, is animal consciousness, Jainism, and science. I noticed this in this conference and earlier as well. Anytime one talks about Jainism and science in the same sentence, an issue comes up, at least an issue that Western scholars have often raised, is that do Jains have a science problem, in the sense that they seek scientific validation of Jain beliefs? Perhaps a validation is reassuring to some, or as one commentator noted, it's a legitimization strategy. Now we have notable scientists here. We heard Dr. Mashelkar, Dr. Srimal, Dr. Dev Kumar, Dr. Mardia. I saw Dr. Bhandari also here. They will tell you that the dialectic of science is criticism, not feel-good cheerleading. So here is a question. Could one argue that it is science that has a religion problem, in the sense that it might have a religious bias, some kind of an incorrigible, inherent bias built into the scientific algorithm? Now I know I'm turning the dominant narrative on its head. So let me, to give context, add to the conversation the third member of our topic, animal consciousness. Now, Jainism and science both agree, and I'd like to appear in jest, although I'm not, that humans and animals are cousins. Of course, when I say this, an image of Jane Goodall and the apes appear before me. Perhaps it appears before you as well, or should. Yet, when you turn to scientific papers, they attach a large dose of wonder and incredulity when it is discovered again and again that animals feel pain and pleasure, are intelligent, and like us, have a personality. Some even have a language. They probably do a better job at communicating across species than we do among ourselves. Could it be then that this endless rounds of incredulity is actually a reflection of science religious bias? One that goes back to the Genesis. Genesis says that man has dominion over all which has a breath of life within it. All is food for him. Now, Genesis would not have said that if animals were our equal, would it? Now, here comes a Jain, that's me, who says that animals are not nearly the human equal. Rather, animals are us. Animals are us, period. At least the higher order animals. Except that only humans are capable of moksha. But as Munishri Mahen Kumarji said yesterday, like humans, all four paths, being reborn as humans, plants, heaven beings, hell beings are just as open to the animals. Now, I'm not going to belabor this point. All I'm saying is this. As we approach our topic today, let's add a dose of skepticism to the two dominant narrative. Number one, that Jainism somehow is in need of scientific validation. And number two, that science is free from religious bias. Yet, and we saw it yesterday and we saw it this morning, that Jains welcome scientific exploration of their religion. Ashokji said that in so many words, that all that we now need is scientific experimentation to prove these doctrines. So I suspect that it's not because Jains have a science problems, but because science will advance or might well advance the core Jain ideas of ahimsa and animal consciousness. Advance them more than any reinterpretation of the human-centered faiths of the Genesis. In other words, science might help mankind move away from the paradigm of dominion to a paradigm of coexistence, to an awakening to the many forms of life and the mysteries of consciousness. So let me close the loop now. Jain's recourse to science is not a legitimization strategy. It's a bargain. Simply put, science is a good bet. Never mind the habitual bouts of wonder and apprehension. So to summarize, here is how I see it. The arc of science is long, but you too have seen it. It bends towards reason. And that's the hope. And that's the promise. So one other quick comment here. Science and religion conversation is often cast in binary terms. Science versus religion, knowledge versus belief, facts versus blind faith. That kind of a construct is ill-suited for Jainism. Let me explain. Now we know that all Jains coalesce around the Tattva Arth Sutra. You can say that it's our textbook. So let's stick with it. The book starts with the sutra, Samyak Darshan, Gyan, Charitrani, Mokshasya Marg. Samyak Darshan, Samyak Gyan, Samyak Charitra together constitute the path to moksha. We know this. Soon thereafter, in that very chapter, it says, Mati, Srut, Avadhi, Manaparyay, Kevalani, Jnanam. Let me explain. And I'll do that when we go through the slides. That Mati Gyan, Shrut Gyan, Avadhi Gyan, Manaparyay Gyan, and Keval Gyan, these are the sources of our knowledge. You will notice, as did I, that knowledge is the building block for the rest of the book, not mere faith. So Jainism purports to postulate its worldview in terms of knowledge, not faith. And that knowledge exists and is inherently realizable. Indeed, Jains hold that it was realized by countless humans, 24 of which we call jinn. So there is one other point, Eric, I'd like to make before we turn to the slides. And that is the object of knowledge. The object of science is knowledge about the universe, chiefly the physical universe. The object of Jain thought is soul in its state of absolute consciousness. Soul is the center of gravity of Jain thought. The object of knowledge is not to know about life as it exists in Mars or the ocean depths of the Challenger Deep, but to empower one right here to realize total, absolute consciousness. It's a good thing for us to keep that object in mind. Now let's turn to the slides. If somebody can switch the slides, that would be good. Let's go to the first slide. And let's click click one more time, please. There you go. So when I use the word awareness, I use it in its wide sense. Earlier this morning, we had Ashokji, and yesterday we had Chakravarti Devakumarji, and many others who talked about the various forms of life. So all living beings, like Ashokji said, have that tactile sense, the sense of touch. Worms have touch and taste. Ants, fleas, termites have touch, taste, and smell. Bees have also the additional sense of sight. Animals, birds, fish have hearing. Now, higher order animals, larger animals, humans, gods, hell beings, they have a physical mind as well. That physical mind has often been called manas, is called manas. And I use the word physical mind in the context of what yesterday Maharaj Sahib said, that there is a psychic mind which all of these beings have. But the physical mind is a unique quality of humans and higher order beings. That is our faculty of reasoning. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, so according to Jain thought, we discuss these 5 senses, the external senses of touch, taste, smell, sight, hearing. And then there is an internal sense organ called the mind. The physical mind is another organ of an instrument of receiving outside inputs. In addition to that, Jain view all of this in terms of vitalities. You know that. So there is other vitalities of body, lifespan, respiration, or breath. They collectively are used in order to obtain what we call knowledge. Now, knowledge has been divided by Jains into two parts, Mati Gyan and Shrud Gyan. We heard about these things earlier also. I have tried to simplify this. So knowledge of the self same person, free from any association with language, personal knowledge, that is called Mati Gyan. In earliest books like Surya Kritang Sutra, it has been called Abhini Bodhak, and the term has undergone some changes. Mati Gyan is a later use of the term, but it does encapsulate the same idea. The other form of knowledge, which we receive, which we hear, which we read, which we listen, which has been verbalized, that is called Shrud Gyan. So Shrud Gyan and Mati Gyan, together with this physical mind that we have, these are all mediated through our senses. So the sense organs play a very important role in arriving at the conclusions, the empirical data, the articulate knowledge, all of that I'm speaking right now. All of this is mediated through senses. So can you click The next, there you go. Maybe we have intuition. When you read a lot, when you study a lot, when you meditate on a certain issue a lot, you get a sixth sense. And I'm going to discuss that a little later, but let's add mediation to it. And that, can you click the slide again, please? That collectively constitutes all of these sources of scientific knowledge. Mati Gyan, Shrut Gyan with a dose of intuition. That is the universe of scientific knowledge. Let's go to the next slide. There you go. Okay. Now all of this, I've put a prism there and put a variety of colors there. And the reason is, yesterday we talked about Anekantvad. All of this knowledge is liable to be correct or incorrect. I might study something and the same set of facts, I might come to a different conclusion. Another person could come to a different conclusion. And therefore, it is all subject to contingency. All science is contingent. Science is based on certain experiments, certain set of facts. Science is not absolute. Science is not going to be the same today as it is going to be tomorrow. So science is contingent. In the same fashion, all of the knowledge that we have obtained is contingent. It could be true, it could be false. Let's move to the next slide now. Okay, this is a tough slide, and I have tried to simplify it after a lot of reading. We'll have to use some Hindi words here. And the reason we'll use those Hindi words is because in converting them into English, lots of authors, lots of well-known Western authors too have used words to describe this. And I'm not sure that's a great and easy way to understand. At least I didn't find it, so I made this slide. So let's go back to what is Mati and Shrut. Now these we know, we discussed it in the last slide, are acquired by the senses. In Jain thought, they are called Paroksh. Paroksh means that which is not direct. So Mati Gyan and Shrut Gyan, all that is acquired by the five senses plus the brain, all residual, empirical, articulate, all memory, recognition, reasoning, apprehension, inference, deduction, analogy, probability, hypothesis, all of those theories, logics, all that we studied in the previous slide is Paroksh knowledge, that which has been acquired by use of these sense organs. Then can you click the slide one more time, please? There you go. So this is the, there you go. And the other form, which is realized directly by the soul. When it says realized directly by the soul, is not that the soul is learning something new. The soul already knew it. It is just that karma stopped one from realizing it, from awareness of it, from its fullest potential. So there is nothing being acquired, unlike the senses, which is acquired. And the next category is realized by the soul. The soul knew it. One is Avadhi, then Manaparyaya, then Kevali, and I'm quoting here from the Tattva Sutra. So this is unmediated, unobstructed knowledge realized by the soul. It is just the opposite of Paroksh. Pratyaksh means immediate, direct, right there. Self-evident, in front of you. There is nothing in between you and it. It's not even visually in front of you. It is within you. You can read it. You can see it. You can understand it. You can bask in it. You can marinate in it. This is it. So these are the three kinds. And Avadhi Gyan, which is extrasensory intuition. We talked about intuition in the last slide. Eric, okay, I have 2 minutes. So extrasensory means clairvoyance as to matters of form and color. It varies based on extent of karma eliminated or subsided. It's transitory, imperfect. Monks have it. Monks among us might have it, probably have it, definitely have it. So they are able to tell you things which are distant. And you would imagine, how would they know? Well, that is what happens when you subside your karma or when you have eliminated them. Years of austerity, meditation has resulted in that empowerment. Manaparya, ability to read another's mental activity, could be rudimentary, or it could be extended. It could be temporary. It might be incomplete. And then finally, we have absolute consciousness, perfect, infinite knowledge, complete elimination of knowledge defiling karma. That Dr. Kachhara Sahab talked about different forms of karma, all forms of karma which are there have been eliminated, and you have reached the state of absolute consciousness. So now, quickly, I know I have just 1 minute left. We saw the difference between the reach of science and the reach of religion. Reach of religion is not going and exploring what's up in Mars. Reach of Jain religion is looking within. And that's a point earlier made also in the morning, that looking within is the new frontier for science. Not going out and experimenting, but doing it within, which definitely means that we train a set of people with the right ethical, moral compass to engage in scientific experimentation. And that kind of a revolution where the knowledge of the within is accepted and shared, that is the challenge for science. How to get out from this morning, we were talking about economics, how to get out of that paradigm where we take the earth as something over which we have command, control, dominion for our pleasure and enjoyment, to the model that all of these together is us. We are not lords of this. And I think that is the real challenge for science, and that is the real challenge for all of us. Now, Eric, I know my time is up, so I'm going to stop here. I would like to say a few things, but I think we can do it in Q&A.
Thank you very much. And thank you for a wonderful presentation that both gave us some very specific content as well as a kind of a general overview of the relationship between science and religion. We come now to our question and answer time. So if anybody has any questions they would like to write and or address to our speakers, please write them in the question and answer box. I will start out while I'm giving you a little moment to think here. We want to mention once again the publication of the book Relative Economics that was mentioned in the last session. It is being premiered here today. Its debut is at our conference, and we're very happy with this. This is edited by Dr. Ashok Bhapna, and we encourage you all to get a copy, to read it, to think about it, and to apply it. We have one question already in the question box, and this one is directed to Dr. Ashok Jain. Have you or Samaniji found a nanoparticle or nanoparticle conglomerates of water molecules as found by Berkeley scientists that have stabilities at known number of molecules such as 40 that are also results of water in oceans? And Professor Jain, would you answer that question, please?
I have not seen any reference of nanoparticles in water. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, very well, very well. Suddenly we lost him.
Yes, I couldn't tell if it was me that lost him or
No, we lost him.
we all lost him. Okay, everybody is in the same situation. While we wait for Professor Jain to come back, let's talk a little bit more about the general interaction. So we've been talking here a little bit about Jainism and science. And I'm curious to follow up on that from either of our panelists who's here. This issue of the soul of something that exists but is non-physical obviously has been a challenge to Western scientists, right, who struggle with this question: does the soul exist? Do you have any sense that Jainism would be able to answer this question better than, let's say, Christianity, right? So Western science is deeply influenced by, in its development, by its seeking to be separate from the Christian faith. Are there particular areas in which you think that Jainism might offer advances beyond what has traditionally been discussed in Western science?
Can I take the answer, Eric?
Yes, please.
Jains follow two practices, one more prevalent today than the other one, which was more prevalent earlier. And that is austerities. We are familiar with the Jain families, people doing 8 days, 30 days fasting. One of the outcomes of that process of doing 8 days fasting is to figure out the distinction between body and self. So yes, there is, on a regular basis, you come to this realization, and this is an experiment that can be repeated by a scientist as well who's curious. With a right state of mind, if one engages in extended austerity, one realizes that one has an existence and potential beyond that of the body. That's one way Jains have done it and do it today. Jains have traditionally done it. All our Jin did it. You'll see all the Tirthankars sitting in a meditative pose. Digambars have statues which shows them sitting in meditation. So meditation, the process of meditation, allows you to find yourself beyond this life. I have known monks who are able to revisit their previous lives and narrate specific incidents. So both of these avenues allow you to identify soul at a personal level. Can this experiment be repeated? Yes, it is being repeated on a regular basis in Jain households all the time when people engage in austerities. Some of them, like monks, Samnijis, might realize it in the course of their meditation and austerities.
Okay, thank you very much.
Professor Muni Mahendra Kumar ji can also give some answer in this regard. He is the scientist, experts of all the scriptures, modern science. So I would like to hear him also.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, as I understood, in Jainism, of course, Keval Gyan is our ultimate aim of spiritual practices or sadhana, ultimately. But unless the moha karma, mohaniya karma, that is the deluding karma, it is obliterated or annihilated completely, one cannot attain the perfect knowledge or the Keval Gyan. It means that after all, the importance is of becoming Vitarag first, overcoming the Mohaniya karma, the effect of Mohaniya karma. Both ways, the belief deluding, that is Darshan Mohaniya karma, and the Charitra Mohaniya karma, that is conduct deluding karma. In the 12th stage of the spiritual development, it is Gunasthana or Jivasthana as it is called. The soul reaches that condition in which the soul becomes completely free from the clutches of the Mohani karma. And the next moment, very next moment, automatically the rise of Keval Gyan, Keval Darshan, and the annihilation of Antraya Karma, obstructing karma, at once simultaneously happen, and a person becomes free from 4 destructive karmas. So what is important to understand is that in Jainism, relatively, of course, knowledge is very, very necessary. It is without knowledge, nothing can be done. But ultimately, one has to understand that mere knowledge will not take you further. And asocha kevali means a person who has not heard anything before. He just follows the simple principles, the fundamental principles of asceticism, 5 great vows, etc., without any further knowledge, but by obliterating or by annihilating Mohani karma completely, he at once is endowed with the omniscience. So this we have to understand. It is said that Audhi Gyan and Bhamparyo Gyan, also they are Pratyaksh Gyan. It's all right, but they will not lead you to conquer the Mohani karma. There are so many Vibhanga Gyani, that is Ajnani. They have not Gyan, it's called Ajnan only because the person is not devoid of the mithya. So that of the Gyan, that clairvoyance, it is, and a person may be endowed with that of the Gyan. Without the aid of the sensory organs, he can have vast knowledge, direct knowledge, but that will not lead him further to the moksha or the self-realization. So what we have to understand, only science, although is in the direction of getting more and more knowledge, deeper knowledge, the knowledge which we don't get by merely by sense organs, they have some equipments. For example, we do not know about the spectrum. That is 7 colors which are visible. But to spectrometer, we come to know that this is the limits of our sense organs. Beyond the violet and beyond the red, there is a vast spectrum, but we don't need by our sense organs. So what I want to insist on is that let science also find out the importance of obliterating moha karma. You know, science believes that it wants to know the truth. And the truth does not only comprises of the knowledge, that is, we have got information. We know, we comprehend, but unless we change our consciousness, transform our consciousness at that level, so that we become free from rag and dvesh, likes and dislikes, delusion. Unless we do that, our progress, our development is only lopsided, one-sided. So what we insist and what we may ask scientists to search for is the ways and means through which the human race, the humankind may become free from all these conflicts, violence, etc., which are the play of Mohani karma. If we can do knowledge plus conduct, what we say, knowledge plus action, then we can actually realize the actual truth, the complete truth. Otherwise, it is only halfway, it is only one-sided, it is lopsided. That's what my comment is there. I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Very good. No, thank you for this wonderful. That was a very good point. And actually, it leads into my question for Dr. Kachara about, I really appreciated your presentation on consciousness and the soul. So I have a question for you about whether science has demonstrated anything that you find maybe helps you to see Jain teachings in a different light. So we know we're saying Jainism can bring important insights to science. Are there any insights that you find that science brings to Jainism? Dr. Kachara. Could you unmute yourself, Professor?
Professor Kachara, you have to unmute.
Okay.
Again, you are muted.
May I interrupt while he's trying to unmute and
No,
speak?
no, okay.
Okay,
This is
Can you hear me?
Mardia.
That's
Yes,
good.
Can you hear?
Okay.
And
Can you
we'll
hear
come,
me?
come to you, sir, in just a minute.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear
Yeah.
you.
Okay. This is a good question, which you raised. The first thing I would like to make, is another dimension of looking at the problem. The problem with science is that the science admits, that the material particles have no intelligence. All our body is made of material particles, and therefore the body does not have intelligence. But we do act intelligently, so from where this intelligence is coming, it's a question. So this intelligence, in fact, is the property of the soul. That's number one. So all the intelligence which you are executing and with which you are working in your life is not a property of your body, because the body made of material does not have intelligence. That's number one. Number two, who makes the experience? Your body does not make experience. So there is something else, which is experiencing pain and pleasure and so on. What is that? And that is soul. It is the soul which makes the experience of all these things. There are people in the psychology and so on, they have put up a concept of qualia. You must be familiar about it. Qualia, Now, what it is like to be, that kind of experience. That experience is made by the soul and not by the body. And there are many other points, who makes the doubt? You doubt yourself, that you say that I am a body, or somebody says that I am a soul. So you have a doubt whether you have a soul or not. I mean, that is the question you raised, So who makes the doubt? Who raises it? The body doesn't have the doubt. The soul is doubting, So your soul is doubting that whether you are a soul or not. It's the body doesn't make that kind of thing, So there are many points, Bhagavan Mahavira has given a wonderful description about all these things to prove the existence of soul. That's a wonderful thing, If you want, I can send you the entire conversation, which took place between Mahavira and his disciple Gautam. This is a long set of questions proving existence of soul, and the doubts, which you have or anybody will have, are cleared from this conversation. Wonderful conversation. I can send you. It takes time, but I have given you some points to prove the existence of soul.
Very good. Thank you so much. Kanti Mardia, you had a question. Go ahead, please.
Not question, but an answer, I think.
An answer. Okay, very good. We like that even better.
I stumbled, with finding what questions you are asking for Jains as well as non-Jains. So I started quite differently, that what you could believe in Jain thinking. So I started with what I call axiomatic system to Jain. And the first principle, which I wrote, Jivati Kam Sanyukta, that you believe for Jain that there is a soul. Then other is it is contaminated. And the third, it is long to be purified. So this, now who can see, because the one karmic matter, which is form of karmons, the word which I created pre-1990, and now I'm glad it has been used quite commonly. Karmons are such subtle particles which are all around us, but they have this funny thing. They are very sophisticated, they are invisible, but they only interact with soul, living things. So because they interact only with soul, it gives science a problem, a challenge. So in CERN, if they want to create, to find this karmic particle or karmons, they have to really change the physics, because as learned people, Gyanis have said, that it is intelligence, it is a combination. So karmic particles or karmons cannot survive without soul. So there is this sophisticated interaction, which is not common. The bombardment is not like proton or photon or electron or something. So it is a quite distinct. And other things with Jain, and I would say Tirthankaras, Mahavira was one who made quite a great progress and taken the subject forward of Jain thinking, but it is all 24 Tirthankaras are really, the knowledge has come through centuries, millennium, and the Mahavira, what he does was he reformulated and made it more accessible and popular, because he talked in the language of that time, and which is how I started also. Not that I have to do anything with that level, but I'm in academics. And when children ask me question, as I said in my opening talk, that to be a Jain, what minimum you should believe. Once if you go from one stage to another stage to another stage, and then it unfolds, and then it leads to what has been said, that what I call axiom 4C, austerity forms the karmic. So the austerity, it comes to what has been said, Tapsa, Nirjaracha, and Samvara. So the Jain, I think one has to either become Keval Gyani, which is not possible according to our scripture, on earth at least. It could be in other world, but not on earth. And it is said that in other world, there are Arihant traveling as far as I know. And I think I am coming on quite a different way. And I hope Gurus and all Gyani people, Michami Dukadam, please forgive me, because I've gone through the same thing for years and years and years. And then this, the idea of axiomatic system to Jainism. So it is Keval Gyani, according to us, can see these particles, karmons. They could see all interaction. They have infinite knowledge. They have infinite bliss, infinite. So their properties of consciousness, everything is infinite. So they could see, but to do that, even in this, you have to, as it has been mentioned, you have to go through 14 Gunastan, path of purification. Jain have formulated stage 1, stage 2. So there are 14 stages which most, well, our Tirthankars have gone through, when they got the moksha and other. So those are not easy. And I'm sorry, again, controversial, and please forgive me, Michami Dukadam, over and over again, that Buddha, according to Jain, he didn't get into quote unquote moksha, or his religion didn't flourish in India because he started Jainism, but he found it too extreme. So he found a middle path. So these are all recorded. I'm not creating myself. And I have, my guru have been Jambu Vijayji Guru. He's one of the very distinguished on scripture. And I also discussed with Mahapragna in 2005. These are my ideas in real near Ajmer. So it is, I think, for non-Jain, what is a plausible system which you can believe in? The plausible system, because what is available just now, why you should have ahimsa, why non-violence? And then what Jain has created, that because of this particle interaction and how they give penalty, how their density increases, decreases. So they try to unfold. So if you believe in this, and if in my, sorry to say, in my book of 1990 and subsequent edition in Hindi and Gujarati, I'm not a salesman, but what I quoted quite a lot of Albert Einstein, which now I'm glad that people are quoting. So one of the things which he wrote, see, I am an academics, and when I do citation, it has to be from journal. So it was in Nature 1940 that he wrote on science and religion. And that's worth reading for every one of us, because he was defining roughly ideas of Jain thinking, but without knowing Jain. So I tried very hard whether he knew Jainism, but I was told from curator from Jerusalem University that he looked at everything, but there was no Jain came to talk to him on this subject. And this is it, Michami Dukram. I don't want to go any further.
No apologies needed. This was wonderful, and we are finished with our session. There are a few more questions. If our panelists could take a look, some of them specific. I see, Jaypat, there are a few questions for you about your very interesting presentation, and but maybe you could answer those in the chat box. Thank you all very much for these wonderful, thought-provoking discussions and presentations, and we will take another little break, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you all.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank
That was a
you.
very
Thank
good
you very
moderation
much.
you
Very good,
did.
pre-
Thank you.
very
Thank you
good
very much.
presentation.
Dr. Kashara, many, many thanks. Enjoyed
you.
your presentation.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody.
FIU's
Thank
Jain
you, Eric.
Studies program is the
Great
first
job, Eric.
Jain Studies academic program
Thank
in
you. My
North
pleasure.
America.
And congratulations to
The
everyone. This is
university
amazing.
has worked
Thank-
with the Jain
No, it was
community
very, very
to
good
contribute to
discussion.
the understanding of this remarkable faith tradition and civilization.
To me, when we look into Jainism, we create Center for Jain Studies. We need to bring to the world what drives success, what drives a peaceful life, what brings happiness.
The Jain community feels very comfortable with the university. They say university is very much organic part of the community. Even if you're a Jain or a Muslim or whatever, for the local community, they know that they can reach out to the university. That the university has done.
My experience here as a researcher, and also like as a member of the Jain community, has completely changed my view of seeing Jainism. Like earlier, I used to see it more as like a ritualistic religion, but here now I can envisage it as more like scientific.
FIU enjoys a close connection to the Jain community, particularly the Jain Education and Research Foundation, JERF.
We want to put the FIU in the world map, saying that this is the first professorship started in FIU, and it created a significant impact in the local community, in Florida itself, and then globally, worldwide.
When non-Jains look at the Jain ideas and come and tell us about it, we learn a little bit more about ourselves. And that's the idea, is that it's not just about sharing, but it's about also us growing with the time, around the values that we value so much.
It is not about the religion. It's not about conversion. I think what we want is just an opportunity to present our age-old pearls and wisdoms of Jainism. Yeah, and I really feel that FIU Jain Studies is the right partner, is the right step for us.
FIU has created new courses that can be taught anywhere in Florida, including the first introduction to Jainism. The university offers certifications and concentrations in Jainism for undergrad, graduate, and beginning this year, a dual religious studies global and socio-cultural studies doctorate.
Even if you don't become a practicing religious person, you should at least understand the values, which is non-violence, tolerance for other, and non-attachment to all the material things, right? The vegetarian lifestyle.
I was just being taught that, okay, you should do this, you should do that. But I never knew like what was the reason behind it, like why we should do it. So I think imparting knowledge and values about the tradition in the right way, and also like through an academic perspective, that's the best that we can do to promote our religion. So I want to serve as a professor and contribute to the society.
Once I found out what Jainism was, I was like super interested in learning about it, because I've been vegetarian since I was like 8 years old, and it was a personal decision of mine when I was younger. I mean, ahimsa is the number one principle in the religion. So I really respected that, and I wanted to learn more.
Each year, the program hosts 2 major lectures that highlight both cutting-edge academic research in the study of Jainism and community activism through the Mahavir Jayanti and Mahavir Nirvan lectures.
The Mahavir Nirvan lectures, they were very helpful because it gave an experience of communicating, first-hand experience again of engaging with Jain community as well as the Jain scholars from different universities.
Students and professors are encouraged to do research with the Jain Vishva Bharati Institute in India and the International Summer School in Jain Studies. Each year, FIU hosts 2 Jain nuns, Samanis, who teach courses and provide extracurricular opportunities on Jainism, such as Breksha meditation.
So in my class, I find almost 75 to 100 students every year, and I find that all are very receptive by learning all these great principles of Indian culture, Asian culture, and also Jain culture. And they are finding that this is the religion which should be taught in every university.
Along with this growth of FIU's programs was the expansion of our model to many other universities in North America. And not 2 months goes by that I don't read about some other university establishing a postdoc program, a professorship, an assistantship, whatever it is, in Jain studies at their university, bringing people very knowledgeable about Jainism to their universities.
A new Center for Jain Studies at FIU would further introduce Jain ethics and virtues to the world by encouraging interdisciplinary research and connecting scholars, policymakers, and activists worldwide.
If you ask me what I would like for my next 10 years is how we think of a research-driven center. And by research, I mean we would like to research and see more similarities across different religious beliefs, different religious groups, and try to share what we stand for. And one way to share is through publications.
So I think our original goal has been fulfilled. I mean, beyond our wildest dreams, it's been done. So the next thing, as you said, is to make this the biggest Jain center. But why do we make it Jain center? So that we can bring Jainism or Jain values to common Americans and communicate to them in a way that they understand.